Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mental Health Awareness Initiative. And today we have a very special guest from America. She is Dr. Sylvia, Assistant Professor in Counseling at the University of Providence. Welcome to the show, ma'am.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. As you said, my name is Dr. Sylvia Lindinger-Sternart, and I'm an associate professor in counseling at the University of Providence. I came from Penn State University in 2015, and I got my Ph.D. and a master's in counseling in Ohio, and another master's in clinical psychology and psychotherapy certificate from my native country in Austria in Europe. I love to work with diverse populations across the world on trauma and building resilience to gain actually holistic wellness. EMDR certification has helped me in my clinical work, and I have presented and published on mindfulness, resilience, trauma, addiction, and other mental health issues at the national and international level.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. And when you had mentioned about trauma and resilience, would like to know what is trauma actually from your perspective?
Yes, trauma is actually very prevalent and many times overlooked, and many times trauma actually is the underlying issue when other mental health issues actually happening. So when a person experiences trauma, the person feels helpless and overwhelmed, and the whole actually ordinary system of care is overwhelmed, and people lose the sense of control and connection and meaning. And even trauma cannot be measured by any single dimension. The core is actually that people feel like helpless and feel actually terror.
Mm-hmm. So it's like when they lose the connection or the control and feel helplessness. So this could be because of some underlying trauma.
Yes. So, for example, I mean, if someone gets abused, people feel completely helpless. They feel completely overwhelmed, and the whole body, not only the mind, but also the body is in this kind of fight status. So they cannot be rational in that moment. Or when people experience an accident, or sexual abuse, or rape, or disasters, or even that pandemic now, I would say we could define it as a collective trauma, specifically at the beginning, when people were completely unsure what does that mean for their reality. So there are collective traumas, individual traumas, but both are actually kind of having that core of helplessness and being overwhelmed and anxious and not really being in control.
Okay. And is addiction also an identification somewhere that the person must have gone through any amount of trauma in their life?
I can tell you from my clinical experience, I have not seen one client who has only addiction. I have never seen addiction standing alone. The people I have seen, and I was also working in a psychiatric clinic for women with substance abuse disorders, all had multiple traumas. Most of them were happening in the childhood the first time, but then actually we are continuing over the lifespan.
This is a very important issue that you have mentioned and you are talking about, because yes, as you have rightly said, it is an underlying issue which is often not focused upon or talked about. because it's so subtle in anyone's life, those who have gone through. Then, in this case, doctor, if you can highlight, okay, if the trauma is there, then how should anyone cope with it or become resilient about it?
Mhm. So if you don't mind, I want to first talk a little bit more about trauma, and then actually come to that question about what can we do. People respond really differently to trauma. Some people are more adaptive. They kind of are by nature a little bit more flexible and can overcome it. Others, the trauma really becomes like the center of their life, and this emotional pain that is created through the trauma, like you said, some really develop these maladaptive behaviors, like they start drinking alcohol or they get anger issues, where actually the trauma is not resolved, and they carry it with them, most of them, So a good way is, of course, to seek out help and seek professional counseling and to work through that trauma in a very safe environment. But also, you can also do something yourself, of course, People
Mm-hmm.
have shown that if you express it in any different ways, that can be helpful. People can write it down, they can write a journal. Of course, if they tell this event to someone, it can help, but it can take a long time, and it really depends to whom a person is sharing it. It can be also counterproductive. So there is some risk in that. It's always better to go to a professional and then actually kind of process it
Address.
in a safe environment. Yes.
Very true. Because then, in that way, it will be addressed systematically and without being judged or, as you said, counterproductive. It will not be in those lines.
Yes, this is also a big problem that people sometimes are so stigmatized when they experience some trauma. Specifically, females often they become actually then the kind of they are charged when they are actually the victims. So it is more safe to seek professional help, and also it goes usually faster because the core when trauma is not processed properly, the core is that it is not integrated properly in our memory. So there are two ways actually when people avoid that kind of integration, they develop PTSD because it's kind of stuck in the brain pathway. And when people get triggered by sensations, then this whole experience comes again like a small video, and they re-experience that. Other people, they may even dissociate from this traumatic event, which means they kind of completely block it, and it's in their unconsciousness and sometimes not even accessible. They kind of make a pattern then after some time when they cope in this way, it can become actually a pattern of coping. And many times when they face some issues, they do the same, that they kind of dissociate themselves completely from this unpleasant event.
So it's like they shut themselves from such incidences or event.
Yes, this is what they do. And in this case, the key for actually having an integrated event is that's the key for actually getting healed from that trauma. And that cannot happen if the person is shutting down or completely unaware or avoid that. So it's actually a necessary step to integrate it and to face it in the long term.
Very true, because this then does change their personality also. It is very painful.
It is very painful, and because of this painfulness, people don't want to face it. And because, of course, who wants to feel emotional pain? But it's better to go through it in a safe environment than actually carry it with you and develop all these other negative behaviors and issues like addiction. Many times people develop addiction because they numb their emotions, basically, their emotional pain with alcohol.
Very true. And you have pointed out to a very important issue also, that yes, numbing down of emotions by finding way which is not again a healthy thing, like addiction or getting into substance abuse, is then becomes more traumatic, adds on to that trauma part in the long run.
Yes, very true. And I think what is also important for people to know, that trauma doesn't only manifest emotionally and behaviorally, it actually also manifests in the body. So people have also health issues because of trauma that was not processed properly. There are studies that have really shown that there are actually changes in the brain architecture. So the neocortex, where we have our logical thinking, where children are learning, where people make rational decisions, this part of the brain is actually shrinked. And also the hippocampus, where there is the memory. And in contrast, the amygdala, where we have all these emotions, the amygdala is enlarged and is very reactive. So this is the reason why people are so easily triggered. If they have traumas that are not processed and integrated properly, they are triggered easily by any sensations that reminds them to this traumatic event.
True. And then in that case, they'll start, because the memory deep down in the at the conscious level is so strong and has not been resolved in appropriate ways, their behavior also then changes accordingly.
Yes, it changes drastically. This kind of people have usually loss of self-worth. They do not trust anyone. They lost their sense of self. So it's kind of, they also kind of have a lot of shame many times, which is a big issue with actually people who have unresolved trauma, because like I said, they feel easily triggered also when they are criticized just a little bit. They may have a strong reaction because it comes back to their unresolved trauma, and where they have actually this shame themselves, specifically when people are experiencing sexual abuse in the childhood. It's very interesting that these children actually feel that shame, even they were victims. They feel responsible, kind of.
Absolutely true. And so, how should then they move on?
So, like I said, if they have not access to some professional help, a good thing is to kind of express it. People can do that by writing, maybe even drawing, or sharing with the person they really trust and they know the person will not take advantage or gossip or share it with anyone else. But usually one time is not enough. It may help because they may increase the tolerance of this kind of traumatic content, and they may heal by integrating it and accepting it after some time. But it's also important to recognize themselves as a survivor, not recognize themselves or identify themselves with a victim, but kind of identify yourself as a survivor. You survived that event. So you got some strengths, to overcome that. And that makes a big difference in the response.
Making them realize their own self-worth and what they are capable of since they have survived this traumatic experience, and thereby then opening the doors towards healing.
Yes, very, very right, because even that takes time, this healing process. It is a very important step, because now we can maybe go to resilience. What is resilience actually? Resilience defines basically the ability of a person to overcome such an event, to bounce back to normal functioning.
Anyone who's listening to this podcast right now who have had an experience which was traumatic at any capacity or at any level, then as what Dr. Sylvia has shared right now, you must go to any professional, and maybe for a period of time, once or twice, somebody you trust, sharing with them will relieve you for some time for sure. But to process the entire thing in totality, you should seek out professional help so that you accept yourself and then heal in the process.
Yes, and there are also kind of different ways, of course, a professional can use. And why I'm saying going to a professional is because there's a risk if a person is not trained well to help another person who experienced trauma, you can re-traumatize them. So there is some training necessary to do the right thing, there are effective ways where people can be helped working through a trauma. I don't know if in India, EMDR is actually known. Eye movement. Do you know that?
Yes, ma'am. Some people do it, but if you can just list out a few tips or techniques which people can look out for.
Yes. So basically what research also found, when actually people have experienced the trauma, that it can really, really help if they have some other people where they can actually have that sense of belonging, so that they are not basically isolate themselves completely and being so alone, creating some sense of belonging, to a group or to a best friend or to a family where they feel supported, can really help, after this kind of experience. Also for children, because many times children experience actually abuse, just if they are not growing up in a loving home, just having another person where they can actually see how a loving home actually looks like can help them actually to overcome a trauma easier, because they have this kind of vision of a loving home. If there are siblings, they found actually that older siblings sometimes, if they didn't get that kind of love in their families, that they can actually give that tenderness to younger siblings, and it is a protective factor. Sometimes extended family can be supportive and protective if it's a healthy system, of course. If maybe grandparents are supportive and very loving, that really, really also helps if something like that happens to a child. But also other strategies can be actually applied for adults, like walking in nature, having like a healthy touch, like massage, can be really helpful. Exercise, neurofeedback, but also meditation and mindfulness is very effective. Positive self-talk, like I said, that you tell yourself you are not a victim, you are a survivor. You have some strengths because you overcame that. You survived it, you know. So this is something that people have really a lot of power actually when they change their mindset, you know, instead of seeing themselves only as a victim. And then, of course, oxytocin, which is the love hormone, is always helpful. If you have people who are loving, that's a good thing and helpful in any situation when we go so difficult life events. But also like sauna or salt baths or yoga. Yoga is extremely beneficial. And in India, that's the homeland of yoga. There are now studies that have shown that yoga is very, very effective in many mental health issues, but also in traumatic events. And deep breathing techniques can help because, like I said, when a trauma is not processed, the body itself is consistently in this fight-flight state. So always hypervigilant. So people have a hard time to relax. But with these techniques, they can basically break that cycle and relax at least for a specific time. What can also be helpful in general for resilience is actually a diet or intermittent fasting, where people don't eat for 16 hours. That can be helpful because it strengthens the immune system of a person. Relaxation, but like I also said, trying to be in a safe environment.
Okay, that is like an exhaustive list, and I'm sure the listeners will benefit out of it and keep it in mind so that they can break the cycle, be in a safe place, and eventually start developing to have a positive self talk so that they can overcome the thought process and direct it towards more positive aspect.
Yes, and you know, it may help sometimes. I also work here in Montana with Native Americans who are very traumatized, the whole society. And it's sometimes helpful to have a metaphor, and I use that sometimes to see a traumatic event as like wild river waters. So even if you may feel anxiety or you may have your life may have been threatened, you can come to calmer waters. You overcame it already, you know, and you can grow from that kind of experience and actually increase your resilience. And there comes another aspect in my mind for parents, because many times parents, specifically in the Western world, became so protective that do not allow their children to actually overcome obstacles. They try to protect them and do it for them. But actually it hinders children to develop a strong resilience, to overcome issues in their lives, which anyone faces, but not to that extent of a trauma, but actually preparing a child for overcoming small obstacles is also very healthy.
So that will also build them and make them realize what they are capable of, wherein then that will reflect also their decision making skills.
Yes, with decision-making skills, you know, when people are traumatized, I said, specifically children, it can be really hard for them to use the brain areas that are responsible for learning and memory and functioning, and making good decisions. This is also something people should be understanding. If children grow up in families where they do not have so much healthy structure, or boundaries, or children are not having this support they need actually when they grow up. For example, a teacher, that they understand that these children have more problems because their brains are not functioning in the same way because they are consistently occupied by this anxiety.
Very true. It is very important to have a nurturing environment at home so that individuals who have gone through trauma part, their journey towards recovery becomes easier.
Yes. And, when people are kind of have gone through a trauma, and this is just a little bit about my work, how I work with individuals, there are other components of resilience, like very clear personal identity is one part, and that applies more to people who come maybe from different cultures or have experienced immigration or genocide, where people have lost their personal identity, and where you have to actually help them to find again or define again who they are, and so that they do not identify themselves with this traumatic experience. So they do not kind of identify themselves with their addiction only. So people can also be careful how they actually call them. When people use alcohol, that they do not call them alcoholics, because this is not the only thing that defines them. They should call them a person who struggles with alcohol, because there are more aspects to this person than only the problem they are facing. Another part is kind of finding purpose in life. When people have experienced trauma, it's also good sometimes to find some purpose, what they can actually do for others, how they can actually not focus all the time on their own kind of trauma, and being optimistic, being actually altruistic was found can be helpful. And spirituality and faith is for many people a big resource. And also having a little bit humor sometimes can help in any challenging life situations. Having actually a role model, this is so important when people share, once they overcame, maybe they can create a self-help group where they share with other people their experience, and can become a role model, how they overcame it. Also, the ability to face actually this fear, and not kind of completely disconnect from that.
That is absolutely true. That's also a wonderful, information that you have given, Doctor. And before we wind up, I would like to know, how has this 1 year been for you?
I do think this year was for everybody challenging, and for myself also, I had my moments where I kind of felt isolated and kind of challenged. But I do think, like every crisis, individually has a positive outcome too. So I myself use the time really for going more inwards, doing a lot of writing and kind of reflection in my spare time. But also there is a lot of need for mental health. So I was also very busy, despite my my teaching at the university. Like I said, I do a lot of pro bono also in the Indian reservations where there's a big demand. So I always encourage everybody, even the whole world goes through this pandemic. There's also something that we learn from it, that we can actually grow. We can grow actually through this pandemic, and hopefully people recognize that no one can live alone. We all need each other. And if we help someone else, we help our whole universe, because we're all connected. We're all a human family, including actually other creatures. I think it was good for the environment that people were not using so many cars and so many flights. So there are good things also coming out of that difficult times.
So this was a time wherein you had introspected and revisited your own self.
Yes, yes. And I do think that is really important for everybody. And specifically, if you're a professional who help others, it's very important to take care of yourself, because you can't help anyone if you are not healthy yourself. And it's important to be holistic in your approach, to look at your body, to look at your soul, to look at healthy relationships, and also your mind, so kind of having a holistic approach when you care about yourself is significant in crisis.
So it's really very nice to listen to all the positive things that you have shared today and all the tips for anyone who has undergone trauma, how they can develop their resilience part and bounce back in life and be functional. Dr. Sylvia, it's really wonderful to listen to you. Thanks a lot for your valuable time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure, and I hope that people can take something from our conversation. And if you don't mind, I would like to have one quote that I personally like, and it is a very, maybe for kind of reflection, and it says, actually, it comes from the native people, and it says, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things are connected.
Thank you for sharing it. It's really beautiful. And with that positive connection, we end the episode for the day. Hope to see you tomorrow with another guest with their perspective. Till then, take care and be safe. Bye.
Thank you.